semantics, surrogate blending, and facial expression. Facial grammar, excuse me.
Ashley was not dead. He had been wounded and taken prisoner, and the records showed that he was at Rock Island, a prison camp in Illinois. In their first joy, they could think of nothing except that he was alive. But when calmness began to return, they looked at one another and said, Rock Island. In the same voice they would have said, in hell. For even as Edisonville was a name that stank in the north, so was Rock Island one to bring terror to the heart of any Southerner who had relatives imprisoned there. Food was scanty. One blanket did for 3 men. 3/4 of all the men sent there never came out alive.
This passage from Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind helped to perpetuate a misleading image of the Rock Island prison in Illinois. The death rate from disease at Rock Island, which was the cause of 97.5% of all deaths at the prison, was actually lower than the death rate from disease for Confederate soldiers in the field. Ironically, Ashley Wilkes from Gone with the Wind had a better chance of returning to Scarlett and Melanie after being a prisoner at Rock Island than if he had continued serving in the Confederate Army. For every 1,000 Confederate prisoners incarcerated at Rock Island, 159 died from disease. For every 1,000 Union prisoners incarcerated at Andersonville in Georgia, 290 died. Union prisoners held at Andersonville were almost twice as likely to die in captivity as the Confederate prisoners held at Rock Island. This documentary tells the story of the Rock Island prison and how it acquired the undeserved reputation as the Andersonville of the North. The Civil War began its 3rd year of fighting in the spring of 1863. Far from Illinois, the Union and Confederate armies fought to a bloody stalemate in the east. In and around Tennessee, however, mobile warfare was being conducted by a previously unknown Union commander, Ulysses S. Grant. In early 1862, he had captured over 12,000 Confederates at Fort Donelson in Tennessee. Then, he captured almost 30,000 at Vicksburg, Mississippi in July of 1863. That year, Federal Commissary General of Prisoners, William Hoffman, was scouting new locations for prisons to hold Grant's captured Confederates. Rock Island, an island in the Mississippi River between Illinois and Iowa, was a prime location. The government already owned the site, and prisoners and supplies could be shipped there by either train or steamboat. Wood for building was readily available, and nearby coal fields would provide heat for the barracks. Union Quartermaster General Montgomery C. Meigs ordered Captain Charles A. Reynolds to build 84 wooden barracks on the island. Each barrack was 22 feet by 100 feet and contained 2 coal stoves for heating, along with a kitchen equipped with a cooking stove and a 40-gallon kettle. The barracks were surrounded by a 12-foot-high fence with 8-foot-high platforms for guards. From his headquarters in Washington, Meigs sent instructions to Reynolds on Rock Island.
The barracks for prisoners at Rock Island should be put up in the roughest and cheapest manner, mere shanties with no fine work about them.
Shortly afterwards, the cost-conscious Meigs wrote again to Reynolds.
It is reported here that there is much finer work intended than is necessary.
By October 1863, all 84 of the prisoners' barracks had been completed. However, much work remained. The prison still lacked barracks for the guards, a hospital, auxiliary buildings, and proper sanitation ditches, known as sinks. The citizens of nearby Rock Island City, Illinois, had petitioned the government for many years to build a bridge to the island, realizing that the presence of a federal installation there would be a financial boon to the city. Finally, working on their own, without assistance from Washington, they built a privately funded wagon bridge. On November 17th, the prison guards began to arrive by train and report for duty. These men, under the command of Colonel Adolphus J. Johnson, were from the Invalid Corps, a ragtag group of sick or wounded men unfit for combat. Author Benton McAdams observed that they had little use for authority, discipline, or sobriety. Within a month, 14 of these guards themselves would be under arrest in the guardhouse. The completed camp consisted of barracks for the guards, commissary and administration buildings, a hospital for the prisoners, and an area for prisoners that later joined the Union Army or Navy called the Calf Pen. East and west gates, high stockade walls with shelters for the guards, and a deadline that prisoners could not cross under penalty of death. However, in late 1863, while the Rock Island prison was not yet ready to start receiving prisoners, General Grant continued to capture large numbers of Confederate soldiers. On November 25, 1863, Grant's forces attacked Confederate General Braxton Bragg's Army of the Tennessee in the battles of Missionary Ridge and Lookout Mountain. What began by Grant as a series of maneuvers to relieve the siege of the city of Chattanooga turned into a Confederate rout as the Army of the Tennessee fled. By the end of the day, over 6,000 Confederates became prisoners of Grant's army. 5,000 of them were loaded onto trains to be taken to Rock Island via Nashville, Louisville, and Chicago. Union General Alpheus Williams, commander of a division at the battle, described the Confederate prisoners as they were being loaded onto the railroad cars.
We have had for a week past a continuous run of rebel prisoners, long lines of railroad trains crammed with them. They are a hard-looking lot of men without overcoats and very short of dirty blankets, marked generally U.S., showing that what they have was stolen from us. A more dirty, destitute, and diabolical lot of humanity cannot be conceived.
On December 3rd, just 8 days after they had been captured in Tennessee, the first prisoners arrived at Rock Island. Many of the Confederates had been living on half rations for months. Union Guard F.A. Jennings described just how thin and hungry the prisoners were.
It takes two of them just to make a shadow.
Confederate prisoner J.W. Minich, who arrived at Rock Island a month later, wrote about the conditions at Rock Island.
Our barracks had good tar paper roofs, and we were protected from the rain, sleet, and snow, if not from the biting frost. True, we were given clothing, coats to those that had none, and one single gray blanket to each man.
Confederate prisoner Corporal William S. Wall of Company E, 2nd Kentucky Cavalry, was transferred to Rock Island Prison from the overcrowded Camp Chase in Ohio. He was assigned to Barracks number 53, where he wrote to his mother in Cynthiana, Kentucky.
Dear Mom, by this time you have doubtless heard of our removal from Camp Chase. This is a rather colder climate, but we have more comfortable quarters and more to eat. Altogether a much better place. In the barracks that I am in, we have 120 men, one big room with 3-story bunks, each bunk for 2 men, 2 large coal stoves in the room, and a separate cook room. We are allowed to have boxes of provisions here, so you can send anything you like.
Nonetheless, the first winter at Rock Island was difficult. Prisoners from the battles around Chattanooga were transported in extremely cold weather to a very cold place. They suffered from a variety of diseases, including pneumonia. Perhaps the greatest scourge was smallpox. The great horror of the Civil War was not the battlefield, it was disease. A Civil War soldier was twice as likely to die from disease as he was from wounds received in battle. The most common diseases were smallpox, also called variola, dysentery, and pneumonia.